Now, I know you have a very interesting story about, and I think this is actually very representative of kind of Falun Gong as a movement. You actually went to China to protest in Tiananmen Square. And as I understand, protests in Tiananmen Square don't always end well.
They don't. We did not receive a warm welcome from the Beijing police.
Well, tell us that story. I mean, it's incredible.
It was actually the backdrop of that is, when the persecution happened, it was largely the decision of one man, the head of the Communist Party at that time, Tiananmen. He was going to go after Falun Gong as a political move to sort of build up his own reputation. He was the first leader of China that had come to power that didn't participate in the revolution. He didn't have a lot of credibility, and he was sort of desperate to kind of build up his own legacy. And along comes Falun Gong and just sort of essentially steals his thunder. It's been very popular around China in the 90s, and everybody's talking about it. And he said, okay, we're going to have to crush this. So he decided to do this. But for the first year, I mean, a lot of people knew what Falun Gong was in China. It wasn't really catching on, especially outside of Beijing and the provinces. So what had happened is a group of people had set themselves on fire in Tiananmen Square, known as the self-immolation. And the state media there had bent that into, they'd sort of cast as like this religiously fueled suicide attempt. We later found out, of course, it was staged. These weren't even Falun Gong practitioners, but that didn't matter inside China. This became a huge propaganda event, and they used it to sort of change the hearts and minds of Chinese people. It was a huge lie, and it was really effective. I mean, people started really, who had previously known Falun Gong, known it to be good, known it to be this wholesome thing that came from the heartland of China. Suddenly they're like, this is weird, this is gross, get away from me. There's a lot of hatred going around.
But the whole thing was fake. Like, no Falun Gong people actually set themselves on fire.
Exactly. I mean, the first one who actually uncovered this was the Washington Post. I mean, they were the first ones to find out, these people, first of all, that supposedly participate in this event, they're not even Falun Gong practitioners. And later on, it was discovered, not only are they not practitioners, it looks like this whole thing was staged in terms of, there were cameras in the area. There was all kinds of things that they pointed out that said, this is probably made up event to do precisely what they did with it, which was paint Falun Gong as evil.
So basically the CCP just burned Chinese citizens and used it for propaganda.
As gross as that sounds, it's exactly what it looks like what they did.
If you are interested in more about that story, we did cover it on an episode of China Uncensored. I could put a link below.
So this event happened, and the propaganda surrounding it was having sort of a devastating effect on people around the country, because obviously that's a very grisly, disgusting story. And so a group of us who had, by this time we had known, okay, the thing is staged. We knew why they did it. We knew how bad of an effect it was. We were going to go to Beijing and actually meet with, before we went to protest in Tiananmen Square, we were going to meet with all the major journalists in Beijing and talk about this and give them the evidence we had. That was the real purpose of the story.
You thought you were going to go talk to Chinese state-run media.
No, sorry, the Western press.
Okay.
Yeah, because a little bit of background there. It's very tricky to communicate with them over phone or email. There's a lot of it's very insecure, and it puts people's lives in jeopardy if we just sort of get on the phone, and that's a whole other story to talk about in terms of how to safely and securely talk to Western media in Beijing without jeopardizing people who practice Falun Gong in China. So we were going to go there. We're going to fly to Beijing. We're going to meet with the Western press and give them the evidence and talk about what really happened with the self-immolation, where some leads that they could follow, which is what we did. After that meeting with the Western press in Beijing, we said, okay, now we're going to take it to the square and make this public. And myself and another friend of mine who was there, we went on to Tiananmen Square. We raised a banner to protest. And we were immediately tackled, put into vans, and taken to an undisclosed location.
What did your banner say?
My banner said, first banner I think said just Falun Gong is good, Falun Dafa Hao, which is something that a lot of the Falun Gong practitioners in China who protest on Tiananmen Square that they would hold up. I think we had a second banner that talked about the self-immolation, that it was a lie. I think those were the two banners, if I remember correctly. It was a while ago that we had.
So how do you go from, hey, this guy I work with, he's kind of a jerk. Hey, now he's a little less of a jerk. Hey, we're doing these exercises, to let me go to Beijing and protest? Because that's like, I mean, you're putting your
That's
life
a hard
online.
left. Yeah, I understand. And how do you go through that in just 2 years, right?
Okay.
So that's an excellent question. I think this is something that maybe people miss about Falun Gong, because when Falun Gong first started in China and became so popular, it was largely on health. I mean, people were like all kinds of stuff, from minor ailments to terminal diseases. I mean, it was sweeping the country.
If you're
as a
going
health
to
tonic.
Tiananmen Square to protest, it's not about health anymore.
Exactly. So that's how it started. But then as you get into Falun Gong a little bit more, you realize that there is a really meaningful spiritual component. Again, it's Buddhist based, but in terms of addressing kind of some big questions in life, and the effect for me was just allowing me to become the person I always wanted to be. I don't know, that's the only way I can say it, is that it allowed me to not only make my body really healthy, but I was able to adopt principles that strengthened my integrity to be, as lack of a better word, a good person. Someone who I'd always struggled to be. You know, you see the good people and the heroes in movies, and you're like, oh, why can't I be that when the chips are down and things are really matter? That's what happened to me with Falun Gong. It's sort of given me the strength and the mental clarity and the integrity to sort of be a good person in every situation, by and large, which is something I'd struggled with. I think we all struggle with to some extent. And that had a profound effect on me. So that was one part of the answer to that question. There is another part of this answer is that, okay, so Falun Gong touched me deeply personally. Then you see what's happening in China. And that really is the tipping point, because you have a group of people that are trying to be essentially good Buddhist sort of meditators, just go about their lives, and they're being horribly persecuted and tortured all around the country. The level of that injustice sort of demanded a response that we can't just do nothing. We've got to do everything we can to make some kind of a difference there with that level of horrific atrocities going on in China. So I think you put those two together, that's my story. And I think that's a lot of the story of the people around me, is that you have something that touches us deeply, and then you have such a gross injustice happening in front of us. A lot of us are going to stand up and do something.
You know, I remember in school learning about world history and like the early days of the Christian church, and how, you know, what Rome was doing to Christians was horrific. And I always wondered, like, why would a Roman citizen who's like has a normal life decide to start practicing Christianity and face all of that? And I guess, like, hearing about Falun Gong, it seems like it's similar. It makes sense in a way.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of us either were practicing, started in the West where it's nice and safe and free, or in China before the persecution, and this whole thing kind of glommed onto us. But yeah, I mean, I think there's some similarities there, because again, you're talking about something that touches us personally deeply, and such a grave injustice that you know, that's going to spur action, and it certainly has over the last 20 years. I mean, the level of activity and what we've, as a community, have done to expose the CCP has been substantial.